The bottom line for today's workshop, I want you to ask yourself, is your resume getting you interviews? Are you targeting your resume to the job posting before you click submit? If not, this session will help you to understand why targeting your resume is so very important and how to do it. We will discuss resume formatting, applicant tracking software, accomplishment statements, and we'll touch briefly on cover letters as well. So let's talk very briefly about employment applications first. Why do they ask for both an application and a resume? Go ahead and type your theories in the chat box. Is this just to torture us? Is it this long drawn out part of the process? Well, the biggest difference that I can draw for you is that one is a form created by the employer and the other is a marketing tool created by you. And folks are talking about, yes, the application is a legally binding document. That's very important, and I'll touch on that. They go to different people. There's two different screenings, specific. One is very structured input, so they can compare apples to apples of each applicant. And they want to make sure that you're listing correct dates to see if they have the same information and they agree. All right, so everyone's into the chat box. I'm glad you're using that and engaging. Thank you for your responses. Okay, so always read through an application's instructions and as much of the application as possible to see what it entails. Give yourself plenty of time. An average job application may take around an hour to complete, plus you'll need a couple hours to target your resume to the job posting itself, and then another half an hour roughly to draft a cover letter. Read the small print. Include your signature confirming accuracy and the truth of information provided. Fill out everything. Use not applicable if necessary, but please do not leave anything blank. Remember the power of first impressions, and this application is creating one. If the employer can't count on you to carefully and completely fill out an application, why would they assume that you'd carefully and completely do your work? Remember to keep good records. Each employer is likely to require you to create at least a password on their online application system. So write it down or put it in a spreadsheet, just however you do it, keep good records. This is one of the most common and most agonizing struggles we see in our career lab when we're open. Remember, the application is one of the first impressions that you'll leave with the employer, so make it a good one. All right, so if we have any questions right away, we can talk about that. But if not, oh, there's Art.
Not a question, but a good statement. You know, when someone creates it has maybe a spotty work history, they can format their resume to deal with that barrier. On an application, it's much harder to hide any inconsistency. Do you have any thoughts on that, Marnie, and how to deal with that?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, contact your staff at your local career force center. Talk to them about what it is exactly you're nervous about, what if it's a gap in your resume, if it's because you were caring for a loved one, if it's because you were incarcerated, if it's because you were unemployed for an extended period of time. Whatever the situation, that is individual to you. And so I want you to speak with someone at your local career force and talk to that staff member and kind of use them as a sounding board, get some advice. You can always ask for a second opinion even if you want, but talk it out and come up with a plan and a strategy for how to fill out those applications. And every application is different, so you might have a different strategy each time. So if you start speaking with the staff, maybe you use that same staff next time you have a different application with a slightly different requirement. So you talk to that same staff and say, okay, so now the situation is this, you know my background, how would you suggest maybe I proceed? And then go ahead with that strategy and see if it works. Art.
We have one more question on applications before we move on to resumes. How to indicate the extended unemployment due to COVID? A lot of people ask this question. A lot of people dealing with this question. What are your thoughts on that?
I think if you're in an application and it asks for reason for leaving, you can always put COVID layoff. And I think just a very brief COVID layoff would cover it. The whole world is experiencing this right now. So by putting that, there's kind of no other explanation needed. If you are really hung up on this, and some folks are, they're really very concerned about this, and it really weighs on them about how do I talk about it, how do I put it down on paper. It absolutely does not need to be on your resume, but if they ask for something on the application, then go ahead and talk to your local staff and come up with a plan for you. But I really think the easiest thing would be COVID layoff and leave it at that. All right, so you'll notice that the recurring theme in my message to you today is to target every resume every time. Include relevant information only. And after we complete this section of creative job search, you should understand key resume basics and the basic sections of a resume. We want you to understand and know the importance of targeting each resume, and then understand your formatting choices and the importance of using the right one for you specifically. And then we want you to know what an accomplishment statement is and how to use it to sell your skills. And then finally, we will talk briefly about the advantage of sending a cover letter and the basic content to include. So there is no exact formula to resume writing. If there was, you wouldn't need us. It's both an art and a science. Careerforce staff is here to offer best practices and strategy advice based on what you've told them about your individual circumstances and situation and desires for your job search. So please keep this in mind as you digest our suggestions. The most important thing is that you yourself are comfortable with your resume so that you can confidently sell your skills and your background when you're interviewing. The more you read and research, you're bound to find conflicting advice. So when this happens, ask yourself about the context. Is this advice directed to a job seeker of a specific industry or with a certain background? Second, ask yourself, is this what's right for me and my job search? The only test for our resumes is whether or not they're generating interviews. So with resumes, where do you start? We want you to understand and learn to create or to take your cues from the employer's job posting. So once you find one, go ahead and read it and really study it. So let's look at a couple of job posting examples here to show you just how this is done or can be done. So how do you figure out what's relevant to the employer? You study this job posting. This right here is a very short posting, just for our purposes today. And in order to target your resume to the job posting, you must really study it and plan your attack based on what you learn. So you'll need to analyze that posting to form your strategy. Now there's several ways to do this. You could use a free word cloud by just Googling free word cloud. And it'll show you what words are most important by making them large. You can use the website jobscan.co for free scans, about 5 per month per email address. And again, we will include that information in the speaker notes. And then I'm going to show you just a manual method that I typically use. So you'll note that I've taken the paragraph from the original job posting and I'll put it into kind of my own checklist just to make it easier as I check things off when I'm creating my targeted resume. Now my checklist is fluid because I may not squeeze all keywords from one of their sentences into just one of my accomplishment statements. So do what works for you. You might do this in a word processing document. You might use a Word document or a Google Docs, or you might print things out and use a highlighter, the old school way. So in order to target your resume to the job posting, you must study it and plan your attack and analyze the wording. I first go through to identify all the action words the employer uses. So you can see here, I've taken all the verbs and I've colored them in green and bolded them. So then going over the posting a second time, I look for keywords and phrases. My third step then is to look for patterns. Do they repeat words? Are they using words that are synonyms of each other? For today's purposes, I've started using the short example. However, most postings are long enough to reveal more telling patterns. So on the next slide, I've included some information from another job posting. Art, was there a question that we should address?
This is
Oh, you were breaking up. So I see Art's video, but it's frozen right now.
all right. It looks like maybe Marnie is having some audio issues. If I could just get a, is anyone here? Okay, sounds like, yeah. Okay, she popped back up. She sounds okay. Okay, it might just be me. Looks like we might have had a blip in the system. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry about that,
All
Marnie.
right.
Yeah, you faded on me. I
No
just wanted to make
worries.
sure. Thank you, everybody. Maybe it was just me.
Okay.
All right, I will. I'll unmute.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so for today's purposes, I have used a longer job posting. You can see here where I've completed the steps 1 and 2. I've identified those action words and I identified some keywords and phrases with the highlighter. And remember, if this is hard to read, you will be sent this slide presentation and our speaker notes. But after I've done all that, typically this is what I can find. I find some patterns where they've used words over and over again, and I need to make sure that I give them the appropriate amount of importance then in my targeted resume. So root words are counted, public, publicity, plan, plans, planning, education and educational, implementation and implementing things. So in this case, my recommendation to the job seeker was to ensure that those 3 highest important words showed up very prominently on either the top third or the top half of the resume. So remember that the resume is not a complete history. It's only a preview. Think of it like a movie trailer, just enough to get the employer interested and wanting to know more. It should be a quick and easy read, and there will be clear sections. Now, the accomplishment statements will not be written in full sentences. They'll be fragments. They'll start with the action word. Remember, this resume is not an essay. It's a marketing tool that you're creating for yourself to sell yourself to the employer to get invited to an interview. So remember, it's a fluid document and its purpose is to get you an interview. And if it's not working, change it. So in the chat box, take a guess at this question. How many seconds or minutes, on average, does an employer spend reviewing your resume the first time? 30, 6, 15 to 20, 20, 10, 30, 60, about 1 minute, 20 minutes, oh my. Okay, so good guesses, everyone. The average that we understand from many studies is that it's roughly 10 to 17 seconds. So you have a very short window of time to really grab somebody's attention and get them to read it versus just the first glean or the first glance. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind and use that to kind of frame your state of mind as you complete these targeted resumes. Now here I wanted to show you a visual of how this might work. Let me explain what you're looking at here. So this image comes to us from theladders.com. It shows the heat from a recruiter's eyeballs as they move over to resumes. So on the right, there are very clear and separate sections, spaced out text. And on the left, there are dense chunks of text and very wide margins. And you can notice here how on the left-hand side, the recruiter maybe just kind of started to zone out. Maybe I like to think they were making their grocery list or thinking about what they were having for dinner that night. On the right-hand side here, you can see that they really spent a lot of time looking down here, and you may not be able to read it, but it does say education down here. Oftentimes, recruiters have a very strict list that they must have a certain diploma, certification, or degree for certain positions and certain employers. All right, so that's your visual to understand visual impact. Now, know that most applications, oh, and here comes Art.
Hopefully my audio is a little better. I apologize for that. I do have questions to get to. I did put a link to a fillable job history, a personal data record. We had a question. Someone had a computer crash and lost, their history. Marnie, do you have any ideas about the best way to get those dates from past employment?
Absolutely. So the best way is to look at your own records. If you've got pay stubs, if you can call and do the legwork yourself, call those previous employers, ask for human resources, ask for the start and end date, and any other information you're missing. That is the best way to do it. The only other way that I know of is to fill out a form and pay a certain rate to the Social Security Administration for them to look up that information for you and then run a report and get it to you.
I had a question on acronyms. I was told never to use acronyms in a resume or application. Are acronyms now acceptable?
It's very hard to do a hard and fast yes or no black and white answer in this business. Most of the time I would say acronyms and abbreviations are not a good idea for a formal document like the resume. However, I have definitely seen many resumes where this is just, it's a hard rule to follow. Medical resumes that I've done with family members, IT resumes sometimes. If at all possible, if you could spell it out the first time with the acronym behind it, and then for the rest of the document, use that abbreviation or acronym, I would say that's fine. But sometimes space-wise, I've noticed it's just not a hard and fast rule that I have to live or die by.
Okay. All right. And then we'll move on. So do you need a resume for each detail of past work? For instance, the position you are applying for has only certain things that you have experience in. So do you have to, put everything you did at a past job on a resume, or only those things specific to the needs of the job posting?
I would stick to what's relevant to this job posting. If there is room of things that are supporting, maybe indirectly supporting details, perhaps, but that's kind of a strategy discussion that I would have on a one-to-one level with staff at your local career force. So know that most application materials will be scanned by software during the first review before they even reach a human eye. Be aware that fancy font can be misread by scanning software used by many organizations to first screen applicant documents. So Applicant Tracking Software, or ATS, can sometimes only read text. Make sure you speak their language. If you or your previous employer terms the people you serve as customers, but the employer whose job posting you're targeting uses the term guests, change that term on your resume. If they list a strong candidate will be detail-oriented as a qualification, change your wording from high attention to detail-oriented. Speak their language. Do some research, look around the application page for the ATS brand name, and then Google that ATS and see what you can find on tips for submitting a resume through that ATS. Be a resourceful job seeker. So resumes should always be honest. Any inaccurate information could cost you your job later on down the road. So focus on skills and things that you have achieved or accomplished rather than just the tasks that you performed. Employers are most interested in results. Focus the resume on a particular job or job posting. If you try to include all of your experience and skills, you will make it harder for the employer to imagine you in the position. This is why we talk about sticking to relevant information. So for example here, don't confuse them by putting forklift experience on a resume that you are preparing for a job at a restaurant. Targeting your resume to a particular job or occupation helps the employer see how qualified you are and increases the likelihood that you will be called for an interview. And remember, to job seekers, the resume is a selling tool. To employers, the resume can be a screening or an elimination tool. So use keywords to stand out in applicant tracking systems that identify and eliminate interview candidates based on keywords, or more accurately, on the lack thereof them. So choose a resume format that best presents your skills relative to the job posting you're targeting. The top third or top half of the page is key. Make sure the reader immediately sees your intention, whether you call that an objective or you just list a professional title, or if you call it a profile or a summary statement. It must grab the employer's attention during the first half of the page. Now, white space, as shown in the visual aid I had, is very important. So often we encourage you to avoid paragraphs and use bullets. Margins can be a minimum of 1/2 inch and no more than an inch. For the easiest readability, I would suggest using size 10-point font to about 12-point font. That's the sweet spot. Any smaller than 10-point and you're going to run into people having trouble reading your font. Now, no need to waste the valuable space on your resume with that old line, references available upon request. That line is no longer trendy in resume fashion, and it's implied that you'll provide resumes if you are asked for them. Now, unless references are requested, do not send them right away. Start with the basics, the application, your targeted cover letter, and your targeted resume, unless the advertisement calls for something additional. If references are requested, place them on a separate sheet with the same name and the contact block that you've used on your cover letter and your resume. So target every resume every time, no matter which format you choose. We all have heard about the chronological, the functional, the combination, but whatever format you choose, make sure that you're targeting the application and the resume and cover letter to that job posting. Art.
To get ahead of some of these, we're getting a lot of questions in. Some of them are, I think we can get through 3 quick ones here. These are common questions. Are you saying that we need to change our resume for every job we are applying for? That's a common question we get.
Slightly, yes. Yes, you want to make sure that you are hitting the key words. You are speaking that employer's language. So the first couple of times, this is going to take a while. And then after you kind of get in the groove, you will be able to see how to rearrange and use different keywords or phrases to do that.
Yeah, so you're not recreating your resume, you're slightly altering it, which leads into our next question is, if you were looking at the scan software and it's saying, here's the words you need to use, do you change the wording from your past work? Is that considered dishonest? So how much leeway do you have between something like training and facilitating, or how far can you go with that?
Um, that's probably another discussion that I would have one-on-one with somebody. And for the most part, it would be to gauge their sense of discomfort and their level. We get questions about, am I lying by omission? No, you're not. You're creating a marketing document. So by using one word versus another, I just really want to talk to you individually and see, again, what your level of discomfort is with this, because I'm not going to tell you to put something on your resume that you're not comfortable with. I can't go to the interview with you, so I can't defend it. You have to be comfortable and confident with whatever you choose to put down there.
Just one more question before we move on. You had a list of avoidable formats, like italicizing and that sort of thing. Was that specific to readability, or was that specific to preference? Because the question is, would those features be okay if you had a PDF resume as opposed to a Microsoft Word resume? So you'd explain why those should be avoided?
Absolutely. So scannability, I think, is the biggest thing to talk about. Scanning by software. So scanning by OCR, or optical character recognition. A human has programmed the software, the machine, to read your resume and read for certain words. Sometimes italicized words can be really slanted and hard to read. They can run into each other. Underlines can cut off the tails of things, and depending on the age of the software, it may or may not read that text well, and that's why we talk about scannability. Sometimes readability comes into it. Italicized lettering can sometimes be hard to read for folks depending on the size. Again, if you have questions on this, please Google ATS and scannability, and contact your local career force staff to talk it over and see if that could be one of the hiccups that you're running into if you're not getting any calls for interviews or emails for interviews. All right, so let's talk about these formatting different types here. So chronological is very typical. Historically, it highlights recent employment while de-emphasizing jobs held years ago. It's best for people with a consistent employment history and no gaps in their employment. It may not be the best format then for individuals who have job gaps or recent graduates or people changing careers. There are better options for those folks. So recent work history should be consistent with the career goal in one of these chronological formats. And you would typically use about 10 to 15 years worth of work history and or your last 3 jobs. So the second type is skills resumes or functional resumes. A true functional resume will really just focus on skills and accomplishments. And it's really recommended for new job seekers, somebody right out of high school. Sometimes it can be used for folks who are doing a career change. However, it does tend to make people very nervous about the fact that they're trying to hide something with a functional resume. So that brings us to the combination, the best of both worlds. Basically using a little bit of chronological list and a lot of functional skill-based stuff. It really, in my humble opinion, is the easiest to target to specific job postings. So like we said, when you're kind of reusing resumes from before, it's easiest to rearrange and reword to fit a new job posting. And generally speaking, I would say this is the most commonly used, what you see out there. It allows you to really focus 2/3 of the document on accomplishments that are relative to your target. And it really condenses the work history into a more concise chronological list. None of these are right or wrong to use. We're just explaining your choices to you. And there's no test on terminology. We just want you to know what's out there and what historically has been used. All right, so I'm gonna rush right into the basic resume parts. Oh, but Art has popped up.
I'll try to be quick. And a couple questions on this. I've always been told to keep a resume to 1 page. What are your options there? And then we'll have one more question.
Okay, so my concern, again, personally, with 2 or 3 page or more resumes is what if the human reader does not get there? Your ATS is not going to penalize you for the length of your resume, but when a human gets there, have you really grabbed their interest enough to read 2 or 3 pages? That's my concern. So strategically speaking, I really levitate to the 1 page, but many people out there will give you advice that says 1 to 2 pages is fine. I would be very strategic about what you put on that first page compared to the second.
Perfect. And then we had 3 or 4 questions on this. So you can only upload 1 resume to LinkedIn. So can you explain the difference between a resume you upload to LinkedIn and a resume you would use for applying for a position?
So in the past, I would say I wouldn't upload a resume to LinkedIn. But I know that they're coming up with new stuff all the time, so maybe that's an option that they're encouraging right now. The nice part of LinkedIn is that it is your complete history. You can use it as an essay. You can use it as, hey, here's a link to work that I've done before, you know, featured things like presentations or talks that I've given, or here's a picture of this beautiful weld that I've done, or you know, things like that. You can put examples of your work. You can put everything out there on that LinkedIn profile that they give you room and sections for. However, if you put just 1 basic resume out there, it's almost limiting to you. So in general, I have read and I agree with not putting your resume on LinkedIn. But we could certainly talk about that more individually later. And we have a LinkedIn class too that you can hear another staff's perspective on and learn a little bit more about LinkedIn. Okay, so we're going to jump into these basic resume parts. We've got the name block, the contact info. Use your full name, no nicknames, but if you go by a shortened version, please feel free to do as we've done here and shown on this slide. Many do agree that by removing the street address, this is a good idea, not only because it can be a security concern, but it can also allow you to be geographically profiled sometimes. And no doubt it will be required on the application, so they'll get that information. Now, as a best practice, we do encourage job seekers to pick 1 phone number and make it simpler for the prospective employers. Make certain it's the number you use, that you'll answer most of the time, and for most people, this will be a cell phone number, and there's no need to label it as such. A phone number's use is implied by its format, and a label is just added clutter that distracts from the essential information. So be aware of your outgoing voicemail message. Keep it professional. No ringback tones, please. No Bible verses, no music, etc. Also with your email address, please keep it professional. Use some form of your name. And if you have to add numbers because you're a John Smith or a John Johnson, avoid numbers that appear to be the year of your birth or the year of your graduation. That automatically comes up in our minds. That's just how we read. So if you are active and your profile is complete and up to date, you may include your LinkedIn or your WorkHands profile link. Now, again, your intention may be titled an objective, a profile, a summary statement, or it might just be mechanical engineer like here, just the title. It should be very specific to the job that you are applying for. So avoid wordy statements that start with generic introductions, such as seeking a challenging position with a growing company. Who does that serve? Challenging position, growing company, that's me, me, me. So remove any instances of the words I, me, or my from the resume. Avoid me-oriented words and phrases in general, and pronouns in general. Instead, offer value to the employer and show them what they'd be gaining by hiring you. For example, you might write, seeking part-time position in the floral industry, offering expertise in merchandise trimming and preparation at high standards, and a record of always operating with the best interests of the employer in mind. This really focuses on the employer and what they're looking for, versus saying, looking for a rewarding part-time job in the floral industry at a company with room for growth and advancement. Again, that growth, that advancement, the rewarding, that's me, me, me. Okay, so then make sure that you are listing your most recent employment first and then work backwards in time. This might include volunteer experience, and that's fine. You may list it all together, both paid and unpaid experience together, or you could have separate sections. Just indicate that appropriately. All right, list your most recent education first and work backwards in time, just like work. If you have any college, you don't need to list high school. Education dates are optional. Please note that education dates can suggest your age and how current your academic knowledge is, and take that into account and consider leaving those dates off the resume. Again, you can bet this detailed information will likely be required in an employer's application. If the targeted position is unrelated to the subject studied, you can leave it off. List any training and continuing education that is relevant to the jobs that you are seeking. You can list organizational memberships related to your target job. You could list awards. You should list awards and any recognition that you've received for your work. List hobbies only if they are related to the target job. If you are applying for a job at the library or a bookstore, then yes, by all means, they're probably interested in your unique interest in memoirs and biographies. But for anything else, if it's not related to the job, it's probably not a good idea to list it on the resume. And then be cautious of listing or including affiliations that can be polarizing. For example, any political or religious things might turn folks off. But if you have done any volunteer work, you could say political or religious volunteer work, or campaigning volunteer work, or church or fellowship volunteer work. There's always ways to say these things that aren't as polarizing. Okay, so ideally, you will seek out different action words to begin each accomplishment statement in your resume. Use the employer's action words to let them know you speak their language. Art.
Yeah, I just want to get to a couple of education questions before we move on. How do you handle name changes? If someplace was a college when you went there, but it's now a university, how would you handle that?
Um, I guess whatever the job seeker is most comfortable with, you could put both. You could put the name of the college as it was when you were there, and along with, in parentheses, now university, or the other way around, university, formerly this, or you could choose one or the other, whatever you're most comfortable with. Using the more current one is going to help you strategically, I think, by being most current, if they recognize that school name.
Okay. Can you omit Masters of Science, MS or MBA or PhD if it doesn't help you? Is that being dishonest by leaving that education or that title off your resume?
I think you may omit it from your resume, but you are not able to omit it from the application, right?
And they are seen
So,
different. Yeah.
yes, they are very different. So again, that application is a legally binding agreement that you're signing versus the marketing document that you're creating yourself, selling yourself towards that specific position.
Okay, just one more question, and then we'll move on. If we don't get to your questions, like I said, we will reach out to you by downloading the chat and finding out what we didn't get to. A couple questions about overqualification. This usually comes up. How do you deal with being more experienced maybe the position requires?
This is another topic that we've always had a specific section on in Creative Job Search and a whole workshop on. So right now we're calling it over 50. It used to be over 40. This is a huge question that people have about being overqualified. And even if it's not been given to them in specific feedback saying, you know, really your education is too much for this, we believe you'd be bored. Sometimes people just get that feeling that they're being pegged as overqualified. What I would encourage you to do is really talk out a networking. We should consider over 60. Yeah, you're not the first person to suggest that to us. I've heard over 60, over 80. You know, I've seen the person in the walker come into our facility, and I understand this is very frustrating. But I really encourage you to talk with your local career force staff about certain strategies on how you might approach things on your resumes, your applications, and most importantly for this group, and I can't stress this enough, is your networking strategy. Because I think if you've been told that you're overqualified, you need a better networking strategy, and you need to be very specific and strategic about who you're applying to and who you're talking to in your networking tasks. And like I said, we do have that over 50 class coming up, I believe in a couple weeks. So examples of action words for your accomplishment statements can be found in long lists online. Just Google resume action words or Google your occupation resume action words to get more specific ones, or visit onetonline.org for ideas. I love that site. I use it all the time as a tool for resume building. So in email resume reviews, I often will alphabetize people's accomplishment statements to really highlight where they've repeated action words or phrases. You need to know that redundancy can be off-putting within resumes. It could be received as a sign of disorganization or a lack of attention to detail. Sometimes repeated action words can mean that you can combine statements. Or you might just right-click on the repeated word and check out the list of synonyms for other ideas. You can also go to thesaurus.com or again, Google resume action words. There are plenty of places out there to help you with ideas. Now, phrases like responsibilities included or responsible for do not add value to your resume. nor do they reveal your unique experience. And they can sound like they've been copied straight out of your internal position description from your last employer. So this is why we teach about accomplishment statements, aka skill statements, impact statements, power statements. These are carefully crafted, and accomplishment statements are how you make yourself stand out from the other candidates by telling your own details of how you performed a skill or a task. So let's give you an example here. When someone is assigned to the reception desk, one of the tasks is to answer the phones. If you simply list that task as answered phones or responsible for answering phones on a resume, it doesn't give the employer very much of an idea of how that person would perform that task. And my guess is that all of you out there can answer a phone, right? So to make it into accomplishment statement, you might need to add details like answered and appropriately directed phone calls on a 6-line switchboard for 5 partner agencies and 40 to 50 staff. That gives the employer an idea of the volume, the extent, the capacity that you have for answering phones. All right, so gotten an activity here for you guys. For the next slide, please open either a word processing document or grab a writing utensil and paper. There will be 2 tasks listed for you. Please prepare to rewrite or retype or reword and revise them into short accomplishment statements, and then share them with us in the chat. Now, as you work and submit to the chat, I want to review some accomplishment statement basics. Now remember, when you're thinking about these, if you've never kept inventory or called customers at work, give me an example of a personal time that you kept inventory of the kitchen or for an event that you were putting on for someone, or your garage or your closet, or a time that you called someone else, vendors or possible car mechanics. Basically, tell me about a time you inventoried something or called someone, and try to put it into that accomplishment statement format using the action word to start, and then give me some specifics about how you individually did that work. Now, some things about that accomplishment statement basics. Resume bullet points should be accomplishment statements, not just tasks. Combination of your action, your details, and the results that really show your value doing that task or performing that skill. A laundry list of your past duties equates to unsubstantiated claims that do not ultimately sell you. So work on building accomplishment statements that really describe your unique experience performing that duty or exhibiting that skill. Strive to include specific details. Try adding numbers by quantifying things. This will enhance each statement, making it more effective. Ask yourself, who, what, where, when, why, and how often? Why you? How well? How many? Roughly how often? What kind? Which included or such as? Maybe by using a particular system or a software or a list making. Maybe you use certain equipment or hand tools or motorized tools, power tools. All right, we'll give you a little bit more time and we'll give some examples. So, kept inventory and called customers. This is something that probably are things that must be like minimum requirements for a job. But how well does each candidate do it? That's what we're looking for. So kept inventory, you could say managed daily inventory of over 1,000 classifications of medical supplies. Again, that gives you some idea of frequency and volume, and then called, excuse me, called customers. Grew client base from 0 to 70 within 2 months by effectively using cold call techniques. This again shows growth. It gives timeline and an amount. So we've got a couple folks who've submitted some things here. Someone says controlled inventory with 0 lost product for over 1,000 parts with 0 deficiencies. Right on the money. I'm guessing that person probably had some experience with inventory. So it was easy to come up with something. Here we go. Managed kitchen inventory by daily reviewing supplies levels and ordered as needed to avoid overstocking. So important, right? Everybody knows that. I do that all the time at my house. Called, managed, and moved 105 accounts through the sales pipeline, selling to groups made up of architects, landscape designers, contractors, volunteer board members, and committees. Now, by listing all those people that the sales pipeline went to, or the groups, that person really shared who all they've worked with before. And that can be super helpful for an employer to see, okay, this person has managed not only this inventory or these calls, but they've managed these relationships with all these different types of groups or people. So by doing these kind of things, by doing this work that you're doing right now, you guys are creating accomplishment statements, not just listing duties. So I've learned a lot more about you just by you coming up with that accomplishment statement. So bravo, thank you for doing that exercise, and I'm going to keep going here. Writing and refining accomplishment statements to target a requirement list in a job posting is just one of the most time-consuming tasks in resume building. However, you can take heart in knowing that all the work that you're doing right now to build that targeted resume is preparing you for the interview. In fact, all of your job search activities are really building blocks to that interview and your next job. So know that you are doing meaningful work as you really take the time to carefully construct powerful accomplishment statements one by one. And you'll be able to reuse them. Do your best to draft these using the job posting as a guide, and then send your drafted resumes along with the targeted job posting into us for review. So it only takes one error of spelling or grammar to really take your resume out of the consideration pile. If you are using a simple text program without spell check, always paste your final product into a Word document or Google Docs or some other word processing software and run the grammar and spelling check. If you don't have it at home right now, send it in to us and let us do it for you. Of course, you'd want to mention that in your email that that's what you're looking for specifically. Now, bottom line again, if your resume is not working and winning you interviews, have it reviewed and change something, do something different. To locate your local email address for resume review requests, go to careerforcemn.com/locations. As soon as you click on that locations and go down on the right-hand side of the page, you'll find that email address for that location. As mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, please give yourself plenty of time when you are applying for a position. I'll reiterate that it takes an average job application about an hour to complete, plus you'll need some time to target your resume to the job posting and a little bit of time to draft a targeted short cover letter. Now, although some may say it's a formality or if it's, maybe even obsolete, we teach that every resume needs to be accompanied by a cover letter. Use the same name or contact information block as on your resume so that it looks uniform, and address the letter to a specific person whenever possible. always try to find an individual's name to address the letter to. After exhausting all your research angles to find a name, use Dear Hiring Manager. Each letter should be targeted towards the job posting and should not repeat anything from your resume. Remember that unlike the resume, the cover letter is a chance to write in full sentences, so show off those skills that you have. Avoid starting too many sentences with I or my if possible. Remember, the entire letter is about you by you, so no need to reiterate those facts with those pronouns. To be honest, cover letters may or may not be read. So unless you're familiar with the person or persons reviewing the application submissions and know their personal preferences and habits, you really have no idea. So just in case, do not repeat things on your resume. Therefore, too, cover letters must be very short, to the point, easily skimmed, just like the resume. I would say 3 paragraphs in total, no more than 3 to 5 sentences each. Indicate how you will follow up with the employer whenever possible. If you do indicate that, make sure to mark it on your calendar and make that effort. Following up does help you stand out and make sure that you are a person of your word by following through with what you've written. If asked to, indicate your salary requirements in the form of a range that comes from your research of local competitive wages. We can help you with that information too. Make sure that you proofread and edit your cover letter as well. No mistakes. All right, tiny bit about salary research. You can look at the Career Education Explorer on the DEED website, mn.gov/DEED. You can look at Glassdoor for salary information, LinkedIn, PaySkill, salary.com. And again, all of that information and all of those links are going to be in the speaker notes that we'll send you. And Art, it looks like we are right at 11 o'clock. I know that you guys have some more questions out there, but we are right at 11.
Yes. Take a look at the chat, and either Marnie or I will get back to you with your specific questions sometime tomorrow. Again, the full presentation plus speaker notes with all those web links that Marnie mentioned will be sent to everyone, along with a recording from today, and then it'll be a YouTube link. Thank you all for attending today. I'll turn it over to Marnie to close it out.
Yes, thank you everyone for your attention and your participation today. I really appreciate you doing the exercise with us, and good luck on your job search. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.